The dust never settled in Millbrook County, Texas. It clung to everything like a second skin, coating the cracked sidewalks, the rusted mailboxes, and the dreams that people had long since stopped voicing aloud. In the heart of this forgotten corner of America, where the nearest Walmart was 40 miles away and hope was as scarce as rain in August, lived a girl named Emma Sullivan. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Emma had never seen the dust. She had never seen anything at all. Born with congenital blindness in a county hospital that had since been shuttered for lack of funding, she experienced the world through calloused fingertips, the taste of metallic well water, and the sound of her father's increasingly desperate breathing as he counted and recounted the handful of crumpled bills that represented their entire fortune. Thomas Sullivan had once been a proud man. Neighbors still remembered when he worked the oil rigs, coming home with dirt under his nails and enough money to keep food on the table. That was before the accident that crushed 3 vertebrae and left him with a permanent limp, before the workers' compensation ran out, before his wife Sarah died, giving birth to their second child, a son who lived only 6 hours. The trailer they called home sat at the end of a gravel road that the county had stopped maintaining years ago. Its aluminum siding was pockmarked, with hail damage from storms that had blown through like angry ghosts, and the front steps had rotted through in places, creating traps for the unwary. Inside, the air hung thick with the smell of poverty, stale cigarettes, instant coffee, and the particular mustiness that comes from never being able to afford proper ventilation. Emma knew every inch of that trailer by heart. She could navigate from her narrow bed to the kitchen sink without brushing against the sharp corner of the television stand or catching her foot on the loose strip of linoleum by the refrigerator. Her world was measured in steps, 12 from her bedroom to the bathroom, 8 from the couch to the front door, 37 from the trailer to the mailbox, where her father checked daily for disability payments that seemed to shrink with each passing month. At 15, Emma had developed the kind of independence that comes from necessity rather than choice. She could prepare simple meals on the ancient gas stove, feeling for the click of the ignition and listening to the whoosh of flame. She could sort laundry by texture, mend torn clothing with stitches that were straighter than most sighted people could manage, and stretch $1's worth of groceries into 3 days of meals. But it was never enough. Thomas Sullivan watched. His daughter moved through their cramped living space with a mixture of pride and crushing guilt that threatened to buckle his damaged spine even further. She deserved so much more than this existence, more than cold beans eaten straight from the can and second-hand clothes that never quite fit properly. She deserved to see sunrises and her own reflection, to read books with her eyes instead of her fingertips, to experience the world in full color instead of the muted grayscale of touch and sound. The medical bills from Emma's birth had never been paid in full. They sat in a box under Thomas's bed, yellowed with age and stamped with increasingly urgent notices. The state had programs, theoretically, but the waiting lists were endless and the bureaucracy impenetrable for a man whose education had ended in 10th grade. He had tried, in those early years, calling numbers and filling out forms, until his pride wore thin and his hope wore thinner. Now, as he sat in his recliner, with its duct-taped arms and missing leg support, watching Emma prepare their dinner of instant mashed potatoes and canned green beans, Thomas felt the familiar weight of failure pressing down on his chest. The electric bill was 2 months overdue, the phone had been disconnected for non-payment, and the landlord had started making noise about eviction. Emma hummed as she worked, a melody her mother used to sing while folding laundry. She had Sarah's voice, clear and sweet, And sometimes when Thomas closed his eyes and listened, he could pretend for just a moment that his wife was still there, that the cancer hadn't eaten her alive, that his daughter could see the smile on his face when she hit the high notes just right. "Dinner's ready, Dad," Emma called, her voice carrying the forced cheerfulness she had perfected over the years. She never complained, never asked why other kids got to go to real schools instead of the underfunded special programs that met twice a week in the church basement. She never questioned why their refrigerator was always nearly empty or why she had to wear the same 3 outfits in rotation. Thomas levered himself out of his chair with a grunt of pain, his back seizing momentarily, before allowing him to shuffle to the kitchen table. The chairs didn't match. One was from their old dining set, one was a folding chair from a garage sale, and one was a bar stool that wobbled dangerously whenever anyone shifted their weight. They ate in relative silence, the only sounds the scrape of forks against mismatched plates and the distant hum of the neighbor's generator. Emma had learned not to fill the quiet with chatter. Her father's brooding had grown deeper over the years, and she had developed an instinct for when words would be welcome and when they would only add to the burden he carried. It was during these silent dinners that Thomas's mind wandered to dark places. He thought about Sarah, about the promises he had made at her bedside as she slipped away. He had sworn he would take care of Emma, that he would find a way to give her the life she deserved. But sitting here, watching his blind daughter eat potato flakes mixed with water because they couldn't afford milk, he felt like the worst kind of failure. The knock at the door came just as they were finishing their meager meal. It was sharp and authoritative, the kind of knock that announced trouble before the visitor even spoke. Thomas exchanged glances with Emma, though she couldn't see the worry that flickered across his weathered features. Thomas Sullivan. The man at the door was wearing a suit that had seen better days, but it was still more formal than anything anyone in Millbrook County owned. He carried a leather briefcase and had the pale, soft look of someone who worked indoors and rarely missed meals. "That's me," Thomas replied, his voice guarded. "My name is Richard Blackwood. I represent certain business interests in the region. I understand you might be facing some financial difficulties." Thomas's jaw tightened. News traveled fast in small towns, especially bad news. "I don't know what you've heard, but may I come in? I have a proposition that might be of mutual benefit." Against his better judgment, Thomas stepped aside and allowed the stranger into their home. Emma remained at the kitchen table, her head tilted slightly as she tracked the unfamiliar voice and footsteps. She had learned to read people through their movements, their breathing patterns, the subtle shifts in tone that revealed more than words ever could. Richard Blackwood surveyed the trailer's interior with the practiced eye of someone who dealt in human desperation. He noted the empty spaces where appliances had once stood, the stack of unopened bills on the counter, the careful way Emma sat perfectly still, as if trying to make herself invisible. "Mr. Sullivan, I'll get straight to the point. I know about your situation, the medical debt, the overdue rent, the utilities that are about to be shut off. I also know about your daughter's condition." Thomas felt his face flush with anger and embarrassment. "My daughter isn't any of your business. On the contrary, she might be exactly my business. I work with families who have children with special needs, children who require expensive medical care that their families simply cannot afford." Emma's hands had gone very still on her lap. Something in the man's tone, in the careful way he chose his words, sent a chill down her spine. She had spent her life learning to interpret the unspoken, and everything about this conversation felt wrong. "What kind of work?" Thomas asked, though part of him already knew he didn't want to hear the answer. Richard opened his briefcase and withdrew a manila folder. "There are wealthy families, Mr. Sullivan, families who have everything except the one thing they want most, a child, Some of these families have very specific requirements. They're looking for children who need medical care, children whose families cannot provide for them adequately. The words hung in the air like smoke, poisonous and inescapable. Thomas felt his world tilt sideways, the ground beneath his feet suddenly unstable. Are you talking about adoption? Legal guardianship, with compensation for the family's sacrifice. These arrangements benefit everyone involved. The child receives the medical care they need, the adopting family gets what they've been searching for, and the birth family receives enough money to start fresh. Emma's breathing had become shallow and careful. She wanted to speak, wanted to tell this stranger to get out of their home, but something kept her frozen in her chair. She had heard stories whispered in the church basement, stories about children who disappeared from their families and were never seen again. How much money? Thomas asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Richard smiled, sensing weakness like a predator scenting blood. For a child like Emma, with her particular needs and potential, I'm authorized to offer $50,000. The number hit Thomas like a physical blow. $50,000 was more money than he had ever seen in one place, more than he could earn in 5 years, even if his back were whole and the job still existed. It was enough to pay off every debt, to start over somewhere new, to maybe even get his own medical care so he could work again. "She's my daughter," he said, but the words sounded hollow even to his own ears. "And you love her, which is why you want what's best for her. Mr. Sullivan, look around. Look at what you can offer her here. No medical care, no education, no future. The family I represent can give her surgery to restore her sight, the finest. Education, opportunities you could never provide." Emma finally found her voice. "Dad." It was barely a whisper, but it carried all the fear and confusion and desperate love she felt. Thomas looked at his daughter, really looked at her for the first time in months. She was so thin that her clothes hung loose on her frame, her hair dull from poor nutrition. Her hands, those clever hands that had learned to navigate a world built for sight, were trembling slightly as she gripped the edge of the table. "Think about it," Richard said, placing a business card on the counter, "but don't think too long. This offer won't remain available indefinitely, and your situation is only going to get worse." After he left, the trailer felt smaller somehow, as if the walls had moved closer together. Thomas and Emma sat in silence, each lost in their own thoughts. The business card seemed to glow on the counter, a small white rectangle that represented either salvation or damnation, depending on how you looked at it. Emma was the first to speak. "Dad, you're not really considering this, are you?" Thomas couldn't meet her unseeing eyes. "Emma, honey, I don't know what else to do. I've tried everything. The bank is going to foreclose on the trailer next month. The power company is going to shut off the electricity. I can't even afford to take you to a doctor when you're sick." Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. "I don't care about any of that," Emma said fiercely. "I don't need to see. I don't need fancy clothes or a big house. I just need you." But even as she said the words, Emma could hear the defeat in her father's breathing, the way his shoulders slumped forward, as if carrying a weight too heavy to bear. She knew that look, even without being able to see it. It was the same look he had worn after her mother's funeral, the look of a man who had reached the end of his rope and was staring down into the abyss. That night, Emma lay in her narrow bed and listened to her father pace the trailer's small living room. His footsteps were uneven, favoring his injured back, and she could hear him stopping every few minutes to look at something. Probably that business card, she realized, with a sick feeling in her stomach. She thought about running away, about disappearing into the Texas countryside and forcing her father to choose love over money. But where would a blind 15-year-old girl go? How would she survive? And what would happen to her father if she left him alone with his guilt and his bills and his broken body? The next morning, Thomas called the number on the card. 2 days later, a black sedan with tinted windows pulled up the gravel road to their trailer. Emma heard it coming long before it stopped, the smooth purr of an expensive engine so different from the rattling pickups and motorcycles that usually traveled their road. Thomas had spent those 2 days in a state of suspended animation, neither fully committed to his decision nor able to back away from it. He had tried to explain to Emma what this could mean for her, the surgery, the education, the chance at a normal life, but the words felt like ashes in his mouth. Emma had stopped speaking to him entirely. When the car doors slammed shut, Emma was sitting on the front steps of the trailer, her few possessions packed in a garbage bag beside her. She had refused her father's help, had insisted on choosing what to take and what to leave behind. The bag contained 3 changes of clothes, her mother's wedding ring that Thomas had given her years ago, and a small wooden box that held the dried flowers from Sarah's funeral bouquet. The man who approached them was different from Richard. Blackwood, taller, broader, with greying hair and kind eyes that seemed out of place in this transaction. He introduced himself as James Harrison, and his voice carried the slight drawl of someone who had spent time in rural areas despite his expensive clothes. "Hello, Emma," he said gently. "I'm going to take care of you." Emma didn't respond. She stood up slowly, shouldering her bag with the dignity of someone much older than 15. When her father reached out to hug her goodbye, she stepped away from his touch. "Emma, please," Thomas whispered, his voice breaking. "I love you. I'm doing this because I love you." For a moment, Emma's composure wavered. Then she straightened her shoulders and spoke directly to James Harrison, though she couldn't see him. "I'm ready." As the sedan pulled away, raising a cloud of dust that settled slowly in the still air, Thomas Sullivan stood in the yard of his failing trailer and watched his daughter disappear around the bend in the road. In his pocket was a cashier's check for $50,000, enough money to solve every problem he had. It felt like 30 pieces of silver, and it burned against his leg like a brand. Emma sat in the back seat of the sedan, her hands folded, carefully in her lap, and tried not to think about the sound her father had made as the car drove away, a sound like something breaking that could never be repaired. The road stretched ahead of them, leading toward a future that neither Emma nor her father could have imagined. Behind them, Millbrook County grew smaller and smaller until it disappeared entirely, swallowed by distance and the shimmering heat that rose from the Texas asphalt like ghosts. The sedan traveled for what felt like hours through landscapes Emma could only imagine. She tracked their progress through the changing sounds filtering through the windows, the steady hum of highway traffic gradually giving way to quieter country roads, the occasional lowing of cattle, and eventually the crunch of gravel beneath. The tires. James Harrison had tried to make conversation during the first hour of their journey, his voice warm and patient as he described the passing scenery. Rolling hills dotted with oak trees, fields of wildflowers stretching toward distant horizons, small towns with water towers painted with school mascots and founding dates. But Emma's responses had been monosyllabic at best, and eventually he had fallen silent, leaving her alone with her thoughts and the steady rhythm of the road. When the car finally slowed and turned, Emma felt the change in the engine's vibration. They were climbing now, the grade steep enough that she could feel it in her inner ear. The air that seeped through the vehicle's ventilation system smelled different here, cleaner with hints of pine and something else she couldn't identify. Not the flat, dusty scent of Millbrook County, but something richer and more complex. Tirun. Sedan came to a stop, and Emma heard James Harrison engage the parking brake. "We're here," he said simply. The door beside her opened, and she felt a gentle hand on her elbow, guiding her out of the vehicle. Her feet touched smooth stone, not the cracked concrete or dusty gravel she was accustomed to, but polished granite that felt solid and permanent beneath her worn sneakers. "Watch your step," James said, his voice closer now. There are 3 steps up to the porch. Emma climbed carefully, one hand trailing along what felt like a wooden railing worn smooth by years of use. The boards beneath her feet didn't creak or sag like the rotting steps of the trailer. These were solid, well-maintained, built to last. The front door opened before they reached it, and Emma heard a woman's voice, warm, with genuine pleasure. "You must be Emma. Welcome home, sweetheart." Home. The word landed in Emma's chest like a stone dropped into still water, sending ripples of confusion and longing through her carefully maintained composure. This wasn't home. Home was her narrow bed with its patched quilt, the kitchen table where she and her father had shared countless silent meals, the particular way the afternoon light slanted through the trailer's small windows. But as she crossed the threshold into the house, Emma couldn't deny that something about this place felt different from what she had expected. The floors beneath her feet were hardwood, polished but not slippery, and they didn't echo with the hollow sound of a space trying too hard to impress. Instead, the house seemed to wrap around her like a well-worn coat, comfortable and unpretentious. "I'm Margaret Harrison," the woman continued, and Emma felt gentle fingers touch her arm. "James is my husband, though I suspect he didn't explain much during the drive. He's not much of a talker unless you get him started on cattle or medical journals." "Medical journals?" Emma asked, speaking for the first time since leaving the trailer. "James is a doctor," Margaret explained, and Emma could hear the pride in her voice. "An ophthalmologist, actually, though he's been semi-retired for the past few years. We moved out here to the ranch about a decade ago when the city started." Feeling too cramped. A ranch. That explained the cattle sounds Emma had heard, the clean air, the sense of open space that seemed to surround the house like an invisible presence. She had never been on a ranch before, had never been anywhere except Millbrook County and the occasional trip to the larger town 30 miles away for supplies they couldn't find locally. "Let me show you to your room," Margaret said. "James can. Bring your bag up later." They climbed a staircase, Margaret's hand resting lightly on Emma's elbow to guide her. The banister was smooth oak, polished by generations of hands, and Emma found herself counting steps automatically. 15 to the landing, then a turn, then 6 more to the second floor. "This is yours," Margaret said, opening a door that swung smoothly on well-oiled hinges. "It faces east, so you'll get the morning sun. There's a window seat where you can sit and listen to the birds wake up." Emma stepped into the room cautiously, her hands extended to map the space around her. Her fingers found a bed, larger than any she had ever slept in, with a thick comforter that felt like clouds beneath her touch. A dresser stood against one wall, its drawers opening and closing with the whisper-quiet precision of quality construction. Near the window was indeed a seat, built into the wall and cushioned with fabric that smelled faintly of lavender. "The bathroom is right across the hall," Margaret continued. "There's always hot water, and I've put some toiletries in there for you. Soap, shampoo, that sort of thing. If you need anything else, just ask." Emma nodded, but didn't speak. The kindness in Margaret's voice was unmistakable, but it only made the situation more confusing. She had expected coldness, calculation, the transactional efficiency of people who saw her as property they had purchased. Instead, she found warmth and what seemed like genuine care. "I'll let you get settled," Margaret said. "Dinner is at 6:30, but if you're hungry before then, the kitchen is always open. Just follow the stairs down and turn left." After Margaret left, Emma sat on the edge of the bed and tried to process everything that had happened. Less than 12 hours ago, she had been in the trailer, eating breakfast with her father and pretending that everything was normal. Now she was in a place that smelled like beeswax and fresh flowers. in a room larger than the entire living area. She had shared with Thomas. She explored the space methodically, her hands learning the location of each piece of furniture, the texture of the walls, the way the window opened to let in air that carried the sounds of horses nickering in a distant pasture. Someone had already unpacked her few belongings and put them away. Her clothes hung in a closet that seemed impossibly large. Her mother's ring sat on the dresser, and the wooden box with the dried flowers had been placed carefully on the nightstand. Beside the bed, at 6:30, Emma made her way downstairs, counting steps and following the sound of quiet conversation. The dining room was warm, with the glow of what she assumed were candles, their scent mixing with the aroma of something that made her stomach growl despite her emotional turmoil. "Perfect timing," James said as she appeared in the doorway. "I hope you like pot roast. Margaret's been threatening to make it all week." "Don't listen to him," Margaret laughed. "He's been asking for pot roast since Tuesday." They guided Emma to a chair at a table that felt substantial beneath her hands. Real wood, thick and heavy, not the folding table with its uneven legs that she was used to. The plate they set before her was warm, filled with more food than she typically saw in an entire day. Pot roast with vegetables, mashed potatoes with butter that she could actually taste, green beans that hadn't come from a can. "So," James said, after they had eaten in comfortable silence for a few minutes, "I imagine you have questions." Emma set down her fork carefully. "Why?" It was a simple question, but it carried the weight of everything she couldn't understand. Why had they paid $50,000 for a blind girl from a trailer in Texas? Why were they treating her like a guest instead of property? Why did their voices carry warmth instead of the cold calculation she had expected? James and Margaret exchanged a look that Emma couldn't see, but somehow sensed. "We lost a daughter," Margaret said quietly. "A long time ago. She was about your age when it happened. A car accident. Her name was Sarah." Emma felt her breath catch. Her mother's name had been Sarah. "For years after that we tried to have another child," James continued. "We went through treatments, procedures, and everything medical science could offer. Nothing worked. We looked into adoption, but at our age, with our demanding careers, we weren't considered ideal candidates. Then James retired," Margaret said, "and we moved out here, and for a while that was enough. The ranch, the quiet, each other. But there was always something missing. When Richard Blackwood contacted us," James said, "he told us about a girl who needed medical care that her family couldn't provide. He said she was intelligent, resilient, that she deserved a chance at a better life." Emma had been listening intently, but at the mention of Richard Blackwood's name, her stomach clenched. "He told you I needed medical care?" "Your blindness," Margaret said gently. "James has been researching your condition ever since we first heard about you. He thinks there might be surgical options, ways to restore at least partial vision." "I don't want surgery," Emma said quickly. "I don't need to be fixed." "Of course you don't need to be fixed," James said, his voice firm. "You're not broken, Emma, but if there's a way to give you sight, don't you think you should have the choice?" The word choice hung in the air between them. It was something Emma had rarely experienced in her 15 years, the luxury of making decisions about her own life, her own body, her own future. "What if I say no?" she asked. "Then you say no," Margaret replied simply. "This is your home now, Emma. That means you have a voice here, you have choices." After dinner, James showed Emma around the main floor of the house. The living room had a fireplace that crackles with real wood, not the artificial logs she was used to. The kitchen was large and well-equipped, with a gas stove that lit reliably and a refrigerator that hummed with the sound of abundance. There was a library filled with books both in print and braille, and a music room with a piano that Margaret played most evenings. "Do you play?" Margaret asked when Emma's fingers found the keys. "No," Emma said. "My father couldn't afford lessons. Would you like to learn?" Another choice. Emma nodded before she could stop herself. That night, lying in the large bed with its soft sheets and thick comforter, Emma stared up at a ceiling she couldn't see and tried to understand what was happening. To her, everything about this place contradicted her expectations. The Harrisons weren't cold or calculating. They weren't treating her like property or a commodity. They seemed to genuinely care about her well-being, her happiness, her choices. But that only made everything more confusing. If they were good people, if they truly wanted to help her, then what did that make her father? Had he really sold her to strangers? Or had he found her a family who could give her opportunities he never could? The questions swirled in her mind, like leaves in a windstorm, impossible to catch or organize. She thought about the trailer, about her father sitting alone at the kitchen table, with his injured back and his stack of bills. She thought about the $50,000 and what it might mean for his future. She thought about the pot roast and the piano and the offer of surgery that could give her sight. Most of all, she thought about choice. That word, the Harrisons, had used so easily, as if it were something everyone deserved. In the trailer, choice had been a luxury they couldn't afford. You ate what was available, wore what fit, took what life gave you, and tried not to complain. But here, in this house that smelled like home despite not being home, choice seemed to be the foundation of everything. Emma fell asleep to the sound of wind in the trees and the distant lowing of cattle, dreaming of her mother's face, a face she had never seen but had always imagined as kind and warm, with eyes that held all the love in the world. The next morning she woke to sunlight streaming through windows she couldn't see and the sound of Margaret humming in the kitchen below. For just a moment, in that space between sleep and waking, Emma forgot where she was. Then memory rushed back, bringing with it all the confusion and uncertainty of her new situation. But as she lay there, listening to the sounds of a household waking up, James's heavy footsteps in the hallway, the coffee maker gurgling to life, a dog barking somewhere in the distance, Emma realized something that surprised her. For the first time in years, she wasn't afraid of what the day might bring. Emma's second week at the Harrison Ranch passed in a blur of new experiences that challenged everything she thought she knew about the world. Each morning brought discoveries that would have seemed impossible during her years in the trailer. Breakfast that included fresh eggs from chickens she could hear clicking in the yard, conversations that didn't revolve around unpaid bills or dwindling resources, and the luxury of time spent on activities that served no purpose beyond pleasure. Margaret had begun teaching her piano, starting with simple scales that Emma's nimble fingers picked up with surprising speed. The music filled spaces in her mind that she hadn't even realized were empty, creating patterns of sound that felt almost like seeing. When she played, the world around her seemed to expand beyond the boundaries of touch and hearing into something richer and more complex. "You have natural talent," Margaret said one afternoon, as Emma worked through a beginner's piece. "Your mother must have been musical." "She sang," Emma replied, her fingers pausing on the keys. "My father said she had the voice of an angel." It was one of the few times Emma had spoken about her past without being directly asked. Margaret had noticed that the girl seemed to exist in a carefully maintained present tense, as if her life had begun the day she arrived at the ranch. Any mention of the trailer, her father, or the circumstances that had brought her here caused her to withdraw into herself like a turtle pulling into its shell. James, meanwhile, had been conducting his own careful observations. As a doctor, he couldn't help but notice the signs of long-term malnutrition in Emma's small frame, the way she startled at sudden noises, or how she rationed her food despite being told repeatedly that there was plenty. These were the behaviors of someone who had lived with scarcity for so long that abundance felt dangerous, temporary, likely to be snatched away without warning. He had also been studying Emma's medical records, such as they were. The file, Richard, Blackwood had provided was frustratingly thin. Basic birth records, a few emergency room visits for childhood illnesses, and precious little information about the specific nature of her blindness. James suspected the condition might be treatable, but he needed more information, and that meant tests Emma wasn't ready for. The breakthrough came during Emma's third week at the ranch, in a way none of them could have anticipated. It started with the storm. Texas weather was notorious for its sudden shifts, but this particular system caught everyone by surprise. One moment the afternoon was sunny and calm, the next the sky had turned an ominous green-black, and the wind was whipping the trees into a frenzy. Emma was in the music room when the first crack of thunder split the air like a gunshot. She had been working on a piece by Chopin, her concentration so complete that she hadn't noticed the changing pressure in the air, the way the animals had gone quiet, or the strange stillness that often preceded violent weather. The thunder was followed immediately by a flash so bright it penetrated even her damaged vision, a brief moment of searing light that made her cry out and throw her hands over her eyes. For an instant, less than a second, she had seen something. Not clearly, not in any way that made sense, but there had been light where there should have been only darkness. Margaret found her moments later, crouched beside the piano bench with tears streaming down her face. "Emma, sweetheart, what's wrong? Are you hurt?" "The light," Emma whispered, her voice barely audible over the rain that had begun hammering against the windows. "I saw light." Margaret's sharp intake of breath was audible even over the storm. She knelt beside Emma, her hands gentle on the girl's shoulders. "Are you sure? It was just for a second when the lightning flashed, but I saw it. I know I did." Margaret helped Emma to the living room and went to find James, who was in his study reading medical journals by the light of a hurricane lamp. The power had gone out with the first lightning strike, plunging the house into the kind of darkness that Emma navigated with ease, but that left sighted people stumbling and disoriented. "She saw light," Margaret told him breathlessly. "During the lightning strike, she saw light." James set down his journal and looked at his wife with the focused intensity he had once brought to particularly challenging cases. "You're certain?" She was crying, James. Happy tears, frightened tears, confused. Tears all at once. She saw something. James found Emma in the living room, sitting perfectly still on the couch, as if afraid that any movement might chase away what she had experienced. He sat beside her carefully, his voice gentle but professional. "Emma, can you tell me exactly what you saw?" "It wasn't really seeing, not like you mean," Emma said slowly, searching for words to describe something that existed at the very edge of her sensory experience. "It was like someone had lit a match in a cave. Just brightness. Just for a moment, but definitely there." "Have you ever experienced anything like that before?" Emma thought carefully. There had been moments over the years, brief flashes when she looked directly at the sun, or when someone shone a flashlight close to her face, but she had dismissed them as imagination, wishful thinking, the mind's way of creating experiences it desperately wanted to have. "Maybe," she admitted, "but I thought I was just imagining it." James nodded, his mind already racing through possibilities. Certain types of congenital blindness could leave patients with minimal light perception, especially if the damage was to the cornea or lens rather than the optic nerve itself. The fact that Emma could detect bright light suggested that her condition might indeed be treatable. "Emma," he said carefully, "I'd like to examine your eyes. Not surgery, nothing invasive. Just a simple examination with specialized equipment. Would you be willing to let me do that?" The question hung in the air between them like a bridge. Emma wasn't sure she was ready to cross. She had spent 15 years defining herself by her blindness, learning to navigate a world designed for sight through touch and sound and intuition. The possibility of vision, even partial vision, was both thrilling and terrifying. What would it mean, she asked? If you found something you could fix? I don't know yet, James answered honestly. It might mean partial sight restoration, or it might mean nothing at all. But don't you think you deserve to know what's possible? That word again, deserve. The Harrisons used it so casually, as if everyone was automatically entitled to good things, to opportunities, to hope. In Emma's experience, people got what they could fight for or what others decided to give them, not what they deserved. But sitting in the darkened living room, with lightning still flickering outside and the memory of that brief, impossible moment of light burning in her mind, Emma found herself nodding. "Okay," she whispered. "Yes." The examination took place 2 days later in James's private office, a room Emma had never entered before. It smelled of medical equipment and old leather, familiar scents that reminded her of the few doctor visits she had managed during her childhood in Millbrook County. James had converted one corner of the room into a small examination area, complete with the sophisticated equipment he had used during his years as a practicing ophthalmologist. The machines hummed quietly as they warmed up, their electronic sounds mixing with the gentle tick of the antique clock on James's desk. "Just relax," James said, as he positioned Emma in the examination chair. "I'm going to use several different instruments to look at your eyes. Some of them will produce bright lights, so let me know if anything is uncomfortable." The first test involved a handheld light that James shone directly into Emma's pupils. She flinched at the brightness but didn't pull away. He made notes on a pad, his handwriting quick and precise, the sound of pen on paper mixing with the steady rhythm of his breathing. Next came a more sophisticated device, something that made a soft whirring sound as it focused on different parts of Emma's eyes. James was quiet during this part of the examination, his professional demeanor masking whatever he was discovering. "Can you see this light?" he asked periodically, adjusting settings and making more notes. "Yes," Emma would answer, or sometimes, "a little," or "I think so." The examination lasted nearly an hour. When it was finished, James helped Emma out of the chair and guided her to a comfortable armchair near the window. Margaret had been waiting in the hallway and joined them now, her presence a warm anchor in Emma's suddenly uncertain world. "Well?" Margaret asked when the silence had stretched too long. James removed his glasses and rubbed his eyes, a gesture Emma recognized as one of deep thought rather than fatigue. "Emma's blindness is caused by congenital cataracts," he said finally. "Dense cataracts that have been present since birth, blocking light from reaching her retinas. But her retinas appear to be healthy, and her optic nerves show normal development." Emma felt her heart begin to race. "What does that mean?" "It means that your blindness is treatable," James said gently. "The cataracts can be removed surgically, and with the proper intraocular lenses, you could potentially have near-normal vision." The words hit Emma like a physical blow. She had spent her entire life assuming that her blindness was permanent, immutable, simply the way she was made. The possibility that it could be changed, that she could see the world the way other people did, was almost too overwhelming to process. "Are you sure?" she whispered. "I'm sure the surgery is possible," James replied. "I can't guarantee the outcome. There are always risks with any procedure, and your brain would need time to learn how to interpret visual information. But yes, I believe we could restore your sight." Emma sat in stunned silence, her mind racing through implications she couldn't begin to sort out. She thought about her father, about the trailer, about all the years of darkness that had shaped her into who she was. She thought about the piano lessons and the ranch and the kindness she had found here. Most of all, she thought about choice, that word the Harrisons had taught her to value, and realized that she was facing the biggest choice of her life. "I need time to think," she said finally. "Of course," James said. "This is your decision, Emma, no one else's. Take all the time you need." That evening, Emma sat on the window seat in her room and listened to the sounds of the ranch settling into night. Cattle lowed in the distance, insects hummed in the trees, and somewhere a barn owl called to its mate with a voice like velvet over steel. She thought about the lightning flash that had started everything, that brief moment of light that had opened a door she hadn't even known existed. She thought about what it would mean to see Margaret's face, to watch her own fingers moving across the piano keys, to look out this window at the landscape she had only experienced through sound and scent. But she also thought about the person she was now, the skills she had developed, the way she moved through the world with confidence and grace despite her blindness. Would surgery change that? Would gaining sight mean losing something else that was equally valuable? The questions circled in her mind like water swirling down a drain, each one leading to 10 others until she felt dizzy with possibility and uncertainty. Downstairs, James and Margaret sat by the dying fire and spoke in low voices about the girl, who had become so important to them in such a short time. "She's scared," Margaret observed. "She should be," James replied. "This kind of decision would terrify anyone, but for someone who's never known sight, it's like asking her to jump off a cliff and trust that we'll catch her." "Do you think she'll do it?" James stared into the flames for a long moment before answering. "I think Emma is one of the strongest people I've ever met. She'll make the right choice, whatever that turns out to be." Neither of them mentioned the other questions that hung unspoken in the air. What would happen after the surgery, if there was one? What was Emma's legal status in their home? And what role had Richard Blackwood really played in bringing her? To them, those were complications for another day. For now, it was enough that Emma was safe, that she had choices, and that whatever decision she made would be truly her own. 3 weeks passed before Emma made her decision. 3 weeks during which the possibility of sight hung over the Harrison Ranch like a summer storm that refused to break. She went about her daily routines, piano practice, walks around the property, helping Margaret with cooking, but everyone could sense the weight of contemplation she carried. During this time, Emma discovered parts of the ranch she hadn't explored. Before, there was a vegetable garden where Margaret grew tomatoes and herbs, their scents creating a map more detailed than any blueprint. A workshop where James repaired ranch equipment, the space filled with the honest smells of motor oil and sawdust. And beyond the main house, a series of barns and paddocks where horses moved with a grace Emma could feel through the vibrations in the ground beneath her feet. It was in the stables that Emma met Carlos, the ranch foreman who had worked for the Harrisons for over a decade. He was a man of few words, but infinite patience, and he seemed to understand something about Emma that others missed. "You ride?" he asked one afternoon as Emma stood near the fence listening to the horses breathe and snort and shuffle their hooves in the straw. "I've never even touched a horse," Emma admitted. Carlos made a sound that might have been approved. "Good. No bad habits to unlearn." He introduced her to Luna, a gentle mare with a coat like velvet and eyes that seemed to see straight through to a person's soul. Under Carlos's guidance, Emma learned to approach the horse with confidence, to read the animal's moods through the set of her ears and the tension in her muscles. "Horses don't care if you can see," Carlos explained as Emma ran her hands along Luna's neck. "They care if you're honest, if you're present, if you respect them." The riding lessons became Emma's favorite part of each day, mounted on Luna's broad back, guided by Carlos's steady voice and the mare's intuitive understanding. Emma experienced a kind of freedom she had never known. The horse became her eyes, navigating trails through pastures and woodland, while Emma learned to trust in something beyond her own limited senses. It was during one of these rides, as they followed a path that wound through a grove of oak trees, that Emma finally voiced the question that had been haunting her. "Carlos," she said, her voice barely audible over the sound of Luna's hooves on the packed earth, "what would you do if someone offered to change something fundamental about who you are?" Carlos was quiet for so long that Emma wondered if he had heard her. Then he spoke, his words carefully chosen. "My grandfather was born in Mexico," he said. "Came here when he was young, worked hard, learned English, became a citizen, but he never forgot Spanish, never forgot where he came from. He used to say that adding something new doesn't mean losing what you already have." Emma absorbed this wisdom as they rode back toward the barn, the late afternoon sun warming her face in a way she was only beginning to appreciate. That evening, she sought out James in his study. He was reading by lamplight, a medical journal open on his desk, but he set it aside immediately when she appeared in the doorway. "I've made my decision," Emma said without preamble. James gestured to the chair across from his desk, his expression carefully neutral. "I'm listening." "I want the surgery," Emma said, the words coming out in a rush before she could second-guess herself. "But I have conditions." What kind of conditions? Emma had thought about this carefully during her weeks of deliberation. "I want to understand everything that's going to happen, every step, every risk, every possible outcome. I don't want any surprises." "Of course," James agreed. "And I want to know about the legal arrangements," Emma continued, her voice growing stronger. "About my status here, about what happens after the surgery. I want to understand what Richard Blackwood told you, what kind of agreement was made." James's expression tightened almost imperceptibly. "Emma, I'm not a child," Emma interrupted. "I know that my father sold me. I know there was money involved, and papers signed and legal arrangements made. I want to know what those arrangements were." The silence stretched between them like a bridge neither was sure they wanted to cross. Finally, James sighed and opened a drawer in his desk, withdrawing a manila folder that Emma couldn't see but could hear rustling as he set it down. "The arrangement," James said carefully, "was for legal guardianship. Temporary at first, with the option to make it permanent, if all parties agreed." "Temporary," Emma repeated. Meaning that legally you could return to your father if you chose to. Or when you turn 18, you could make your own decision about where you want to live." Emma felt something loosen in her chest, a knot she hadn't even realized was there. "So I'm not property." "You were never property," James said firmly. "You're a young woman who deserves care and opportunities and choices about her own life." "What did you pay him?" Emma asked quietly. James hesitated. $50,000. Emma nodded, unsurprised. It was the figure Richard Blackwood had mentioned. That night in the trailer, a sum that must have seemed like a fortune to her father, with his stack of unpaid bills and his desperate situation. "Do you regret it?" she asked, "paying that much for a blind girl?" "Emma," James said, his voice heavy with emotion, "you are not a purchase. You are not a transaction. You are the daughter, Margaret, and I never thought we'd have the chance to. No. If anything, $50,000 was far too little for the privilege of having you in our lives." The words hit Emma with unexpected force, and she felt tears spring to her eyes. In all her years with her father, despite his love for her, she had always been aware of being a burden, a complication, a responsibility he couldn't quite afford. Here, for the first time, she was hearing herself described as a privilege. "There's something else," James continued, "about the surgery. I want to perform it myself." Emma blinked in surprise. "Can you do that?" "I'm still licensed, still qualified. And I've been researching your specific case, consulting with colleagues, reviewing the latest techniques. I believe I can give you the best possible outcome." The idea of having James perform the surgery felt right in a way Emma couldn't quite explain. He wasn't just any doctor. He was someone who cared about her, someone who would treat her eyes with the same careful attention he brought to everything else in his life. "When?" she asked. "We'll need to do some additional tests first to make sure we have all the information we need. Then probably 2 to 3 weeks for preparation." Emma nodded, feeling a mixture of excitement and terror that made her stomach flutter like a bird trying to escape a cage. And after, what's recovery like? James leaned back in his chair, his expression thoughtful. It will take time. Your brain has never learned to process visual information, so even with perfect surgical results, you'll need to learn how to see. It might be weeks or months before you can fully interpret what your eyes are telling you. Will I still be able to be myself? Emma asked, voicing her deepest fear. All the things I've learned, the way I navigate the world, will I lose that? Those skills are part of who you are, James assured her. Surgery can't take away 15 years of experience and adaptation. If anything, combining your existing abilities with sight should make you incredibly capable. They talked for another hour, covering practical details and addressing Emma's concerns. When she finally stood to leave, James caught her hand gently. "Emma," he said, "I want you to know how proud I am of you. This decision, the courage it takes, it's remarkable." Emma squeezed his hand in return. "Thank you for everything, for giving me the choice." The next few weeks passed in a blur of medical preparations and emotional anticipation. James scheduled Emma for additional tests at a hospital in Dallas, comprehensive examinations that confirmed his initial diagnosis and revealed the precise nature of the cataracts that had stolen her sight. Margaret helped Emma prepare practically and emotionally for the procedure. They discussed what it might be like to see colors for the first time, to understand concepts like distance and perspective that Emma had only experienced through sound and touch. "What do you think I'll notice first?" Emma asked one evening as they sat on the porch, listening to the sounds of night settling over the ranch. "Probably light," Margaret replied. "The way it changes throughout the day, the way it plays on surfaces, creates shadows. Light is the foundation of everything we see." Emma thought about that first lightning flash, the moment that had started this entire journey towards sight. It seemed fitting that light would be her introduction to the visual world. Carlos continued Emma's riding lessons, but now with a new purpose. "After the surgery," he explained, "you'll see Luna properly for the first time, but she'll still be the same horse you've learned to trust. Sight will just add another layer to what you already know." The surgery was scheduled for a Friday morning at Dallas Presbyterian Hospital. James would perform the procedure with assistance from a colleague, Dr. Jennifer Martinez, who specialized in complex cataract cases. The night before they were to leave for Dallas, Emma sat in the music room and played piano for what might be the last time as a blind person. Her fingers moved over the keys with the confidence born of weeks of practice, creating music that filled the house with melody and hope. Margaret and James listened from the doorway, neither speaking, both understanding that they were witnessing something significant. Tomorrow, everything will change. Emma would begin the journey towards sight, toward a new way of experiencing the world, toward a future none of them could fully imagine. But tonight, she was simply a young woman playing piano in a house where she was loved and valued and given choices about her own life. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges and discoveries, but tonight was perfect in its own quiet way. As the last notes faded into silence, Emma lifted her hands from the keys and smiled. "I'm ready," she said to the darkness that would soon be transformed into light. The drive to Dallas took 3 hours through countryside that Emma experienced as a symphony of changing sounds and scents. Highway noise gradually gave way to city traffic, the clean air of the ranch replaced by the complex mixture of exhaust, asphalt, and the indefinable energy of millions of people living in close proximity. Emma sat in the back seat of James's truck, her hands folded carefully in her lap, trying to process the magnitude of what lay ahead. In less than 24 hours, she might see Margaret's face for the first time, might understand what colors actually meant, might experience the world in a way that had been impossible since birth. The hotel James had chosen was quiet and comfortable, with thick carpets that muffled sound and air conditioning that hummed with expensive efficiency. Emma's room adjoined theirs, connected by a door that they left open so she wouldn't feel isolated in the unfamiliar environment. "Nervous?" Margaret asked as they ordered room service dinner. "Terrified," Emma admitted, "but also excited. It's strange to feel both things at once." James, who had been unusually quiet during the drive, finally spoke up. "When I was training to be a surgeon, my mentor told me that the best patients are the ones who understand both the risks and the possibilities. You're going into this with your eyes wide open, so to speak." Despite the gravity of the situation, Emma laughed at the unintended irony of his words. "My eyes wide open. That's the whole point, isn't it?" They arrived at the hospital at dawn, when the building was just beginning to stir with the purposeful activity of the morning shift. Emma was admitted through a side entrance that avoided the chaos of the main lobby, a consideration James had arranged to minimize stress and confusion. The preoperative area was a world unto itself, filled with the distinctive sounds and smells of medical preparation. Machines beeped softly, wheels rolled across polished floors, and voices spoke in the measured tones of professionals going about familiar routines. Dr. Jennifer Martinez introduced herself with a warm handshake and a voice that carried both authority and compassion. She explained each step of the preoperative process as it happened: the IV insertion, the application of monitoring devices, the administration of medications designed to keep Emma calm and comfortable. "The procedure itself will take about 2 hours, Dr. Martinez explained. Dr. Harrison will make a small incision in each eye, remove the cataracts, and insert artificial lenses. You'll be under general anesthesia, so you won't remember any of it." Emma nodded, her mouth too dry for speech. Margaret held her hand, a warm anchor in the sea of medical activity surrounding them. "The most important thing to remember," James said as they prepared to move Emma to the operating room, "is that this is just the beginning. When you wake up, your eyes will be bandaged, and it will take time for everything to heal. Don't expect to see clearly right away." "I know," Emma whispered. "I'm ready." The operating room was a cathedral of technology, with lights and monitors and machines that hummed with quiet efficiency. Emma was transferred to the operating table with gentle hands and soft voices, the anesthesia mask placed over her face with careful precision. "Count backwards from 10, the anesthesiologist said. 10, 9, 8. Emma's voice faded as consciousness slipped away, taking with it the last moments of her life as a blind person. James Harrison had performed thousands of surgeries during his career, but as he looked down at Emma's peaceful face under the surgical lights, he felt the weight of responsibility more acutely than ever before. This wasn't just another procedure. It was the potential transformation of a young woman's entire existence. Working with microscopic precision, he made the first incision in Emma's right eye. The cataract that had blocked her vision since birth was dense and fibrous, more challenging to remove than some he had encountered, but not beyond his skill. Years of experience guided his hands as he carefully extracted the clouded lens and prepared the eye for its artificial replacement. Dr. Martinez assisted with quiet efficiency, anticipating his needs and maintaining the sterile field with practiced ease. The new lens, made of a clear plastic material that would never cloud or degrade, slipped into place with satisfying precision. The left eye presented similar challenges, but James's confidence grew with each successful step. The cataracts that had stolen Emma's sight yielded to modern surgical technique, replaced by lenses that would allow light to reach her retinas for the first time in her life. "Beautiful work," Dr. Martinez murmured as James completed the final Sutures. These results should be excellent. Emma woke in recovery to a world of muffled sounds and gentle voices. Both eyes were bandaged, leaving her in a darkness that felt different somehow. Not the permanent darkness she had known all her life, but a temporary absence of light that carried the promise of change. "How do you feel?" Margaret's voice came from somewhere to her left. "Strange," Emma managed, her voice hoarse from the anesthesia. "Like I'm floating." "That's normal," James said. "The medication will wear off over the next few hours. Your eyes are bandaged to protect them while they begin to heal." "Did it work?" Emma asked the question she had been afraid to voice. "The surgery went perfectly," James replied. "We won't know about your vision until we remove the bandages in a few days, but I'm optimistic." The next 3 days passed in a haze of rest and anticipation. Emma remained in the hospital for monitoring, her eyes protected by bandages that blocked out all light. She slept fitfully, her dreams filled with colors she had never seen but somehow imagined, with faces that had no features but somehow conveyed love and warmth. Margaret rarely left her side, reading aloud from books they both enjoyed, describing the view from the hospital window, keeping up a gentle stream of conversation that helped pass the hours. James checked on Emma's progress regularly, monitoring for signs of infection or complications that could threaten the surgery's success. On the third day, the moment everyone had been waiting for finally arrived. "Ready to see what we've accomplished?" James asked as he and Dr. Martinez prepared to remove the bandages. Emma's heart hammered against her ribs. "I think so." "We're going to do this slowly," Dr. Martinez explained. "The room is dimly lit and will gradually increase the brightness as your eyes adjust. Remember, it may take time for your brain to make sense of what it's seeing." James began with the right eye, carefully peeling away layers of gauze and protective covering. Emma felt air touch her eyelid for the first time since the surgery, a sensation that seemed impossibly light and strange. "Keep your eyes closed for..." "Now," James instructed, "I'm going to put some drops in to lubricate it." The drops felt cool and soothing, different from anything Emma had experienced before. When James finished with both eyes, he stepped back and nodded to Dr. Martinez, who dimmed the room's lights to their lowest setting. "Now," James said softly, "when you're ready, try opening your eyes very slowly." Emma took a deep breath, her entire body trembling with anticipation and fear. 15 years of darkness had led to this moment. 15 years of wondering what light looked like, what colors meant, what it would be like to see the faces of people she loved. Slowly, carefully, she opened her right eye. Light flooded in, not the brief flash she had experienced during the thunderstorm, but sustained, coherent illumination that her brain struggled to interpret. For a moment, everything was chaos, shapes and shadows and brightness that made no sense, visual information that her mind had no framework for understanding. Then, gradually, patterns began to emerge. The ceiling above her was white. She somehow knew it was white, though the concept of white as something seen rather than imagined was revolutionary. There were rectangular shapes that might be ceiling tiles, lines that might be the edges where walls meet ceiling. "What do you see?" Margaret's voice came from somewhere in the swirling confusion of visual input. "Light," Emma whispered, tears streaming down her face. So much light. She opened her left eye, and the world doubled, then somehow merged into something more complete. The shapes became more defined, more coherent. She could see the outline of a person sitting beside her bed, Margaret, though she couldn't yet make out features or details. "The people," Emma said, her voice filled with wonder. "You're not just voices anymore, you're shapes, you're there." James moved into her field of vision, a tall figure in what she assumed was a white coat. "Can you see my face?" Emma studied the blurry shape that was his head. She could make out the general arrangement of features, darker areas that might be eyes, a pale shape that could be his face, but details remained frustratingly elusive. "Sort of," she said. "It's all soft, unfocused." "That's normal," Dr. Martinez assured her. "Your brain is learning to process visual information. It will take time for everything to become clear." Over the next hour, as Emma's eyes adjusted to light and her brain began the complex process of interpreting sight, the world gradually came into focus. Colors remained mysterious. She could see that things were different from each other, but the names for those differences would have to be learned. Distances were confusing, depth perception non-existent. But she could see Margaret smile when the older woman leaned close to the bed. She could see James's eyes, kind and warm behind wire-rimmed glasses. She could see her own hands, pale and thin against the white hospital blanket. "It's overwhelming," Emma admitted, as nurses came and went, as doctors checked her progress, as the familiar hospital routine continued around her. "There's so much, everything. We'll take it slowly," Margaret promised. "You don't have to figure it all out at once." That evening, as Emma sat propped up in her hospital bed, experimenting with opening and closing her eyes, she thought about the journey that had brought her to this moment. 6 months ago, she had been living in a trailer with her desperate father, eating beans from cans and wondering if they would have electricity the next day. Now she was seeing, actually seeing, for the first time in her life, surrounded by people who loved her enough to give her this impossible gift. But even as she marveled at the miracle of sight, Emma couldn't shake the feeling that something was still incomplete. She could see Margaret's face now, could watch James's expressions change as he spoke, and could observe the world in ways she had never imagined possible. Yet somewhere in the back of her mind, she kept thinking about her father, about Thomas Sullivan sitting alone in that trailer, using the $50,000 to pay bills and buy groceries, wondering if he had done the right thing by selling his daughter to strangers. She wanted him to see this moment, to know that his sacrifice had led to something beautiful. She wanted him to understand that letting her go had been an act of love, not abandonment. But she also realized that her story was far from over. Learning to see was just the beginning of a much longer journey toward understanding who she was now, what her place was in the world, and how to balance the gratitude she felt toward the Harrisons with the complicated love she still carried for the father who had given her up. As night fell and the hospital grew quiet around her, Emma closed her eyes and tried to remember what darkness felt like. But even with her eyelids shut, she could sense the light beyond them, could feel the difference between the intentional darkness of closed eyes and the permanent darkness that had defined her life for 15 years. Tomorrow, she will go back to the ranch with sight. Tomorrow, she would see Luna's gentle eyes and the oak trees where she had made her decision. Tomorrow, she would begin the complex process of reconciling the person she had been with the person she was becoming. But tonight, she simply lay in her hospital bed and marveled at the fact that when she opened her eyes, the world appeared before her in all its chaotic, beautiful, overwhelming glory. The return journey to the ranch was nothing like the trip to Dallas had been. Where Emma had previously experienced the world through sound and smell, she now sat mesmerized by the window, watching the landscape unfold in ways that challenged everything she thought she understood about space and distance. "The sky is so big," she murmured, pressing her face close to the glass. "I never imagined it could be so endless." Margaret, sitting beside her in the back seat, smiled at Emma's wonder. "Wait until you see your first sunset, or sunrise over the ranch." The concept of color remained largely mysterious to Emma, though she was beginning to distinguish between what the Harrisons called blue and green and brown. The sky was blue, apparently, though it looked more like a vast field of something light and changing. The trees were green, which seemed to be a darker, richer version of the same lightness. The road was grey, a colour that felt neutral and solid beneath the truck's wheels, but it was the movement that captivated her most. The way clouds drifted across the sky like living things, the way telephone poles flicked past the window in steady rhythm, the way other vehicles appeared in the distance and gradually grew larger before disappearing behind them. The world, she realized, was in constant motion in ways she had never fully comprehended. "How do you concentrate on anything?" Emma asked James, who was driving with the patient skill of someone accustomed to country roads. "There's so much to see, so much happening all at once." "You learn to filter," James replied, glancing at her in the rearview mirror. "Your brain will start prioritizing what's important and letting the rest fade into the background. Right now, everything is new and fascinating, but eventually you'll be able to focus on what matters most." When they finally turned into the ranch's long driveway, Emma gasped audibly. The house she had come to know through touch and memory was revealed in all its substantial beauty. White clapboard siding with green shutters, a wraparound porch supported by thick columns, flower boxes bursting with colors she couldn't yet name but could appreciate for their brightness and variety. "It's beautiful," she whispered. "I knew it was, but seeing it—" Carlos emerged from the barn as they pulled up, his weathered face creased in a smile that Emma could now see for the first time. He was smaller than she had imagined, with grey hair beneath a battered cowboy hat and eyes that crinkled at the corners from years of squinting into the sun. "How are the eyes?" he asked, as Emma climbed carefully out of the truck, still uncertain about judging distances and depths. "Working," Emma replied, studying his face with the intensity of someone trying to memorize every detail. "You look exactly like you sound, if that makes sense," Carlos chuckled. "Luna's been waiting for you. Horses know when something important happens." The reunion with Luna was overwhelming in ways Emma hadn't anticipated. The mare she had known, through touch and scent, and the rhythm of her gait was revealed as a creature of stunning beauty. Sleek muscles moving beneath a coat that shifted from dark brown to lighter brown depending on how the light struck it. Intelligent eyes that seemed to recognize Emma despite her transformed ability to meet their gaze. "She's magnificent," Emma breathed, running her hands along Luna's neck while simultaneously seeing the gesture for the first time. Her own hands looked strange to her, pale and delicate, more fragile than they felt. "I never realized how graceful." "She is. Want to ride?" Carlos asked. Emma hesitated. Everything about riding would be different now that she could see. The balance and trust she had developed would have to be recalibrated to account for visual input that might conflict with the instincts she had trained so carefully. But as Luna nuzzled against her shoulder with familiar affection, Emma realized that sight hadn't changed the fundamental relationship between them. The horse still trusted her, still responded to her touch and voice in the same way. "Yes," Emma said. "I want to see the ranch the way you've been showing it to me." The ride through the pastures was a revelation. Emma had known the ranch was large and had felt its scope through the time it took to travel from one area to another, but seeing the rolling hills stretch toward distant tree lines gave her a new appreciation for its vastness. Cattle dotted the landscape like scattered boulders, their black and brown shapes creating patterns against the green grass. "How many acres?" Emma asked as they paused on a hill that overlooked much of the property. "About 800, Carlos replied. "James bought it piece by piece over the years. Used to be 3 separate branches." Emma tried to comprehend that number, to visualize what 800 acres actually meant in terms of the space spread out before her. It seemed impossibly large, a personal kingdom of grass and sky and freedom. As they rode back toward the barn, Emma noticed something that made her pull Luna to a stop. In the distance, near the main house, a black sedan was parked in the circular driveway. "Carlos," she said, pointing toward the vehicle, "do you know that car?" Carlos followed her gaze, his expression darkening slightly. "Looks like Richard Blackwood's back." Emma felt her stomach clench. She had almost forgotten about the man who had arranged her transfer to the Harrisons, who had negotiated the price for her guardianship like she was livestock being sold at auction. The sight of his car brought back memories of that awful night. In the trailer, the sound of her father's desperate breathing, the weight of being treated as a commodity rather than a person. "What does he want?" Emma asked. "Don't know," Carlos replied, "but I reckon we should head back and find out." They rode toward the house at a faster pace, Luna's hooves drumming against the packed earth in a rhythm that matched Emma's accelerated heartbeat. As they approached the barn, Emma could see James and Margaret standing on the front porch with a man in an expensive suit, Richard Blackwood, looking exactly as predatory as he had sounded during their first encounter. Emma dismounted carefully, still adjusting to the visual cues that helped her judge distances and movements. Carlos took Luna's reins without being asked, understanding instinctively that Emma needed to handle whatever was happening at the house. "Stay close to the barn," he advised quietly. "Listen first, decide later." Emma nodded and walked toward the house, her new vision allowing her to read the body language of the three adults on the porch in ways she had never been able to before. James stood with his arms crossed, his posture defensive. Margaret had positioned herself slightly behind her husband, but her expression was alert and concerned. Blackwood appeared relaxed, confident, but there was something in his stance that suggested coiled tension. "Emma," James called as she approached, "Mr. Blackwood was just leaving." "Actually," Blackwood said, his voice carrying the smooth authority. Emma remembered so well. "I was hoping to speak with Emma directly about her future." Emma climbed the porch steps slowly, using the railing for support while her eyes adjusted to the different lighting. Up close, Blackwood was exactly what she had expected. Well-dressed, well-groomed, with the kind of smile that never quite reached his eyes. "What about my future?" Emma asked, proud that her voice remained steady despite the anxiety crawling up her spine. "I have some exciting news," Blackwood replied, "about opportunities that have become available because of your transformation." James stepped forward slightly, positioning himself between Blackwood and Emma. "Any opportunities for Emma can be discussed through her legal guardians." "Of course," Blackwood agreed smoothly, "but Emma is intelligent enough to understand when something benefits her directly. Aren't you, Emma?" Emma studied his face, trying to read the expressions she was still learning to interpret. There was something calculating in his eyes, something that made her think of the predatory birds that sometimes circled the ranch looking for weakness among the livestock. "What opportunities?" she asked. Blackwood reached into his briefcase and withdrew a folder. "There's been quite a bit of interest in your story, Emma. The blind girl who received the gift of sight from a benevolent doctor. Media outlets are very interested in documenting your journey." "Media outlets?" Margaret's voice carried a sharp edge of concern. "Television interviews, magazine articles, perhaps even a book deal. Emma's story could inspire millions of people. And of course, she would be compensated handsomely for sharing her experiences." Emma felt the pieces clicking together in her mind like a puzzle solving itself. "You want to sell my story?" "I want to help you profit from your unique situation," Blackwood corrected. "This kind of media attention could set you up financially for life. College, career opportunities, connections with influential people, all of it becomes possible when you have a platform." "And what do you get out of it?" Emma asked bluntly. Blackwood's smile widened. "I represent other clients with similar stories. Building a portfolio of inspiring narratives benefits everyone involved." James's expression had grown thunderous. "Emma's story is not for sale. With respect, Dr. Harrison, that's not your decision to make. Emma is old enough to understand the value of what she's being offered." Emma looked back and forth between the men, feeling the weight of their conflict pressing down on her shoulders. She thought about her father, about the $50,000 that had bought her freedom from the trailer, but had also made her a commodity to be traded. She thought about the Harrisons' kindness, about the choices they had given her, about the surgery that had restored her sight, not for profit, but out of love. "Mr. Blackwood," Emma said finally, "I appreciate your interest in my story, but I'm not interested in selling it." Blackwood's expression hardened almost imperceptibly. "Emma, you may not understand the financial realities of your situation. The Harrisons have been generous, but you'll need to support yourself eventually. This could provide that security." "I'll find my own way to support myself," Emma replied, "without exploiting what happened to me." "Think carefully about this decision," Blackwood pressed. "Opportunities like this don't come around often." "I have thought about it," Emma said, her voice growing stronger, "and my answer is no." Blackwood gathered his papers with movements that suggested barely controlled frustration. "If you change your mind, you know how to reach me." After he left, the three of them stood on the porch in silence, watching his sedan disappear down the driveway in a cloud of dust. "I'm proud of you," James said finally. "Why?" Emma asked. "For turning down money." "To understand that some things are more valuable than money," Margaret replied. "Your story, your experiences, your privacy, they belong to you, not to people who want to profit from them." Emma nodded, but part of her mind was still processing the encounter. Blackwood's visit had reminded her that she existed in a complex web of legal arrangements and financial obligations that she didn't fully understand. The Harrisons had paid $50,000 for her guardianship. James had performed expensive surgery, and they were providing her with food, shelter, education, and opportunities that cost money. What did they expect in return? And what would happen when she turned 18 and the legal arrangements changed? That evening, as Emma sat in the music room practicing piano, she found herself looking at her hands, moving across the keys for the first time. The visual component added a new dimension to her playing, allowing her to see the relationship between the physical movements and the sounds they created. But even as she marveled at this new layer of understanding, Emma couldn't shake the feeling that Blackwood's visit had changed something fundamental about her situation. She was no longer just a girl learning to navigate the world with restored sight. She was someone whose story had value to other people, someone whose experiences could be packaged and sold to the highest bidder. The question was, what was she going to do with that knowledge? As she played a piece by Debussy that Margaret had been teaching her, Emma made a decision. She would continue to learn, to grow, to explore the possibilities that sight had opened for her. But she would do it on her own terms, without selling her soul to people who saw her transformation as nothing more than a profitable narrative. She had been bought and sold once. She would never allow it to happen again. Outside the music room, windows, the sun was setting over the ranch, painting the sky in colors Emma was just beginning to understand. Red and orange and purple bleeding together in ways that took her breath away. A daily miracle that most people took for granted, but that struck her as proof that the world was full of beauty worth protecting. Even if that protection came at a cost. Winter arrived early at the Harrison Ranch that year, bringing with it a crystalline beauty that Emma had never imagined possible. She stood at her bedroom window on a December morning, watching frost patterns create intricate designs on the glass like nature's own artwork. The pastures stretched away under a blanket of snow that sparkled in the morning sunlight, and the bare branches of oak trees stood stark against a sky so blue it seemed to vibrate with color. 7 months had passed since her surgery, 7 months of learning to see the world in ways that still surprised her daily. Her vision had stabilized beautifully. James's surgical skill had given her sight that was nearly perfect, requiring only minimal correction with glasses for reading. But more than the physical transformation, Emma had undergone a metamorphosis of spirit that touched every aspect of her life. She had learned to drive, mastering the complex visual processing required to judge distances and speeds while controlling a vehicle. Margaret had been her patient instructor, teaching her on the ranch's private roads before graduating to the highways that connected their corner of Texas to the wider world. Her piano playing had evolved as well, incorporating the visual feedback of watching her fingers dance across the keys. She had progressed beyond the simple pieces Margaret had first taught her to complex compositions that challenged both her technical skill and her emotional expression. Music had become her language for processing the overwhelming beauty of a sighted world. But perhaps most importantly, Emma had begun to understand her place in the complex family dynamic she had joined. The Harrisons had never treated her as anything other than their daughter, but Emma had needed time to fully accept that love without the guilt of knowing what it had cost her father. The letter arrived on a Tuesday, delivered by the rural mail carrier who served the scattered ranches in their area. Emma recognized her father's handwriting immediately, the careful, labored script of someone who had left school early but still took pride in proper penmanship. Her hands trembled as she opened the envelope, unsure what she would find inside. They had not communicated since that awful day when she climbed into Richard Blackwood's sedan, her few possessions in a garbage bag and her heart heavy with confusion and loss. Dear Emma, I hope this letter finds you well and happy. I think about you every day and wonder if you can see now. The doctor who arranged everything told me there would be surgery, that you might get your sight back. I pray that's what happened. I want you to know that the money helped more than I can say. I was able to pay off all our debts and even had enough left over to get my back looked at by a real doctor. He says I might be able to work again if I'm careful. I've been staying sober and trying to make something better of myself. But mostly I want you to know that I love you and I'm sorry. I'm sorry for being the kind of father who couldn't take care of his own daughter. I'm sorry for the years of cold beans and empty promises. I'm sorry for selling you to strangers, even if they turned out to be good people. I know I don't deserve forgiveness, but I hope someday you might understand that I only wanted what was best for you. You deserved so much more than I could give. Your father who loves you, Thomas Sullivan. Emma read the letter 3 times before the tears made it impossible to continue. She sat on her bed, holding the worn paper, feeling the weight of her father's words and the love that had motivated his impossible choice. That evening, she showed the letter to James and Margaret. They read it in the living room by the fireplace, the flames casting dancing shadows on their faces as they absorbed her father's pain and regret. He sounds like he's doing better, Margaret observed gently. He's sober, Emma said. That's huge for him. He's been drinking since my mother died, maybe before. If he's really gotten clean. Do you want to see him? James asked. The question hung in the air like smoke from the fireplace. Emma had thought about her father countless times over the past months, wondering how he was surviving on his own, whether the money had really solved his problems or just delayed them. She had imagined confronting him about his decision to sell her, demanding explanations and apologies. She had also imagined forgiving him, understanding the desperation that had driven him to such an extreme choice. I don't know, Emma admitted. Part of me wants to show him what his sacrifice accomplished. I want him to see that I can see that the surgery worked, that I'm happy and healthy and loved. And the other part? Margaret prompted. The other part is angry, not just about the money, but about all the years before that. The hunger, the cold, the way he made me feel like a burden he couldn't wait to get rid of. James leaned forward in his chair, his expression thoughtful. Those feelings don't have to be resolved all at once, Emma. You can take as much time as you need to decide what kind of relationship, if any, you want to have with your father. What if I wanted to visit him? Emma asked suddenly. What if I wanted to go back to Millbrook County and see him? Then we would support that decision, Margaret said without hesitation. We could drive you there, or you could go alone if that's what you prefer. You're 18 now, Emma. You're old enough to make those choices for yourself. Emma nodded, though the prospect of returning to the trailer park where she had spent her first 15 years felt both compelling and terrifying. She had changed so much since leaving that place, not just gaining sight, but gaining confidence, education, opportunities she had never dreamed possible. What would it feel like to see that world of poverty and desperation with eyes that had been opened to so much beauty and possibility? 3 weeks later, Emma made the drive to Millbrook County, alone. She had insisted on going by herself, needing the time to prepare mentally for what she might find. The Harrison Ranch had given her a pickup truck for her 18th birthday, a used Ford that was reliable and comfortable, painted a deep blue that she had chosen because it reminded her of the Texas sky on clear days. The drive took 4 hours, through countryside that gradually became more familiar as she approached her old home. The landscape grew flatter, drier, and more desolate. The prosperity and careful maintenance she had grown accustomed to at the ranch gave way to the casual neglect of a region where survival took priority over aesthetics. Millbrook County looked smaller than she remembered, its few buildings clustered around the intersection of 2 state highways, like survivors huddled around a dying fire. The gas station, where she had sometimes bought groceries with food stamps, was still there, though the paint was more faded and several windows were boarded up. The church, where she had attended special education classes twice a week, had a "for sale" sign in its yard. The trailer park sat at the edge of town like an afterthought, a collection of aging mobile homes arranged without plan or purpose on a patch of caliche soil that turned to mud when it rained and dust when it didn't. Emma parked at the entrance and sat for several minutes, gathering courage for what lay ahead. Her father's trailer looked both exactly the same and completely different. The structure itself was unchanged, the same dented siding, the same sagging steps, the same air conditioning unit that rattled when it ran. But the yard had been cleaned up, the trash hauled away, and someone had planted flowers in old coffee cans arranged along the front step. Thomas Sullivan answered her knock immediately, as if he had been waiting by the door. Emma's first sight of her father in 7 months struck her like a physical blow. He was thinner, cleaner, and his eyes were clear in a way she had almost forgotten was possible. He wore clothes that fit properly and smelled of laundry detergent instead of stale beer and cigarettes. But it was the look on his face when he saw her that nearly broke her heart, a mixture of joy, shame, and desperate hope that spoke to years. "Of regret and longing, Emma," he whispered, and she could see tears starting in his eyes. "You can see me. I can see you, Dad." They stood on either side of the threshold for a long moment, neither sure how to bridge the gap between them. Then Thomas stepped back and gestured for her to come inside. The trailer's interior had been transformed. Where Emma remembered chaos and neglect, she now found cleanliness and order. The walls had been painted, the carpet replaced, and the furniture arranged with care. A small bookshelf held volumes that looked well read, and photographs she had never seen before were displayed on the kitchen table. "You've been busy," Emma observed, running her fingers along the back of a chair that had been reupholstered in cheerful fabric. "Had to do something with my hands," Thomas replied, his voice carrying the careful cadence of someone who had learned to think before speaking. "Staying busy helps with staying sober." They sat at the kitchen table, and Emma found herself studying her father's face with the intensity of someone seeing it for the first time. He was younger than she had imagined, probably not yet 50, with features that suggested he had once been handsome before life and alcohol had worn him down. His hands, which she remembered as trembling and uncertain, now rested steadily on the table between them. "The money," Thomas said suddenly. "It wasn't just about the bills, though God knows they were drowning us. It was about giving you a chance I never could." "I know," Emma said. "I understand that now." "Do you?" Thomas asked, his voice urgent. "Because I need you to know that selling you was the hardest thing I've ever done. Harder than burying your mother, harder than admitting I was an alcoholic, harder than anything I can imagine. But I looked at you, sitting in this trailer, so smart and talented and deserving of everything, and I knew I was failing you every single day." Emma felt tears starting in her own eyes. "You weren't failing me, Dad. You were trying." "Trying wasn't enough," Thomas said firmly. "You needed more than trying. You needed someone who could give you opportunities, medical care, education, a future. I couldn't be that person." "You could have gotten help. There were programs. That had waiting. Lists years long and requirements I couldn't meet," Thomas interrupted. "Emma, I called every number, filled out every form, begged every bureaucrat who would listen. The system wasn't designed to help people like us." Emma absorbed this information, pieces of a puzzle she had never fully understood clicking into place. Her father's decision hadn't been made in a moment of drunken desperation. It had been the end result of years of failed attempts to find legitimate help. "Tell me about your new life," Thomas said, clearly eager to change the subject. "Are you happy? Are they good to you?" Emma found herself describing the ranch, the Harrisons, her surgery and recovery, her growing skills and independence. As she spoke, she watched her father's face transform with pride and relief. He asked questions about her piano playing, her riding lessons, and her plans for college. The conversation gradually became easier, more natural, as they found their way back to the fundamental love that had always existed between them despite everything else. "I want you to meet them," Emma said finally. "James and Margaret, I want you to see that your sacrifice led to something beautiful." Thomas's face went very still. "Emma, I don't think that's a good idea." "Why not?" "Because I sold you to them," Thomas said bluntly. "I took money in exchange for my daughter. That's not something people forgive, even good people." "They're not like that," Emma insisted. "They understand why you did it. They respect you for making such a difficult choice." Thomas was quiet for a long time, staring at his hands. "Would it help you?" he asked finally. "If I met them, would I say thank you in person?" "Yes," Emma said without hesitation. "It would help all of us." The meeting took place the following weekend at a restaurant halfway between the ranch and Millbrook County. Emma had chosen the location carefully, neutral ground, where no one would feel the weight of obligation or charity. Thomas arrived early, dressed in clothes Emma had never seen before, his hair carefully combed and his hands steady. James and Margaret were punctual as always, and Emma performed introductions with the careful courtesy of someone navigating potentially explosive emotions. But the tension she had feared never materialized. Instead, the four of them found common ground in their shared love for Emma and their mutual recognition of the impossible situation that had brought them together. "I can never repay you," Thomas said to James and Margaret as they shared dessert and coffee. "Not the money, not the surgery, not the love you've given her. But I want you to know that Emma is the best thing I ever did with my life. And giving her to you was the only good decision I made for 15 years. You did more than just give her to us," Margaret replied gently. "You raised a remarkable young woman. The strength and wisdom Emma shows every day, that came from you, from the foundation you built during those difficult years." James nodded in agreement. "We were able to give Emma opportunities, but we couldn't have given her character. that was already there when she arrived. As Emma watched the three most important people in her life find ways to honor each other, despite the complex circumstances that had brought them together, she felt something settle into place that had been unbalanced for months. This wasn't about choosing between her old life and her new one, between gratitude and forgiveness, between the father who had sacrificed everything for her and the family who had given her everything in return. This was about understanding that love takes many forms, that sometimes the most loving thing you can do is let someone go, and that families can be created through choice as well as biology. 6 months later, Emma started classes at the University of Texas, majoring in social work with a focus on helping families navigate the complex systems that had failed her own family so completely. She lived in a dorm room that she had decorated with photographs from the ranch, and she called both the Harrisons and her father regularly. Thomas had kept his sobriety and found work as a maintenance supervisor at a school district, a job that provided him with purpose and just enough income to live comfortably. He visited the ranch twice a year, usually staying in the guest room for long weekends, during which he helped with repairs and maintenance projects, while building a genuine friendship with James and Margaret. Emma had also started a scholarship fund for children with disabilities whose families couldn't afford proper medical care. The fund was small but growing, supported by donations from people who heard her story, not through the media exploitation Richard Blackwood had envisioned, but through word of mouth and the quiet power of example. On the evening before she graduated from college, Emma sat on the porch of the ranch house with James and Margaret, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of rose and gold. Luna grazed in the near pasture, her foal running in circles around her with the boundless energy of youth. "Any regrets?" Margaret asked, breaking the comfortable silence. Emma considered the question seriously. She thought about the trailer, the hunger, the years of darkness, both literal and metaphorical. She thought about the difficult choice her father had made, and the courage it had taken for all of them to build something beautiful from such painful circumstances. "No," she said finally. "I wouldn't change anything. Every part of the journey was necessary to get us here." As the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, stars Emma could now see in all their infinite glory, she felt the deep contentment that comes from understanding that she was exactly where she belonged, surrounded by people who loved her. Not despite her complicated history, but because of it. The girl who had been sold for food had become a woman who chose love, chose family, chose to use her experience to help others find their way through their own impossible situations. And in that choice, she had found the most precious gift of all, the knowledge that she was home. 3 years into her social work career, Emma received a call that would test everything she had learned about forgiveness, family, and the power of second chances. The voice on the other end of the line was professional but urgent, a caseworker from Child Protective Services in a neighboring county. "Ms. Sullivan, we have a situation that requires someone with your specific expertise. There's a family, a single father and his daughter. The girl is blind, the father is struggling financially, and there are some concerning offers from private parties wanting to help with the situation." Emma's blood ran cold. What kind of offers? The type that sounds too good to be true. Wealthy, benefactors promising to solve all their problems in exchange for guardianship rights. "We've seen your work with similar families, and we need someone who understands the dynamics involved." Emma agreed to take the case immediately. As she drove to meet the family, she couldn't help but see the parallels to her own story. But this time, she would be the one with the power to intervene, to offer real help instead of exploitation. The Gonzalez family lived in a small apartment above a struggling grocery store. Miguel Gonzalez was a widower trying to raise his 12-year-old daughter Sophia alone, while working 2 jobs to make ends meet. Sophia had been blind since birth due to complications during delivery, and like Emma so many years ago, had never received proper medical evaluation or care. They say they can fix her eyes, Miguel told Emma during their first meeting, his voice heavy with the same desperate hope she remembered from her father's face. They say they can give her everything: surgery, education, a good life. All I have to do is sign papers making them her legal guardians. Emma spent hours with the family, getting to know Sophia's bright personality and quick wit, observing Miguel's genuine love for his daughter, despite their difficult circumstances. She also investigated the people making the offers, discovering connections to organizations that had concerning track records with vulnerable children. "Mr. Gonzalez," Emma said during their third meeting, "I want to tell you a story about a father who faced the same choice you're facing now." She told him about Thomas, about the trailer and the desperation and the impossible decision to let her go. But she also told him about the alternatives that existed now, programs she had helped develop, funding sources that hadn't existed 15 years ago, medical partnerships between public hospitals and private foundations that could provide treatment, without requiring families to surrender their children. "The difference," Emma explained, "is that you have choices now that my father didn't have. We've learned from families like ours, and we've built better systems." Working with James, who had remained active in medical volunteer work, Emma arranged for Sophia to receive a comprehensive eye examination at no cost. The results were promising. Like Emma, Sophia had congenital cataracts that could potentially be corrected surgically, but instead of requiring the family to give up custody, Emma helped them navigate a new program that provided the surgery through a partnership between the University Medical Center and a legitimate charitable foundation. Miguel would remain Sophia's father throughout the process, and the family would receive support services to help them through the transition. The surgery was successful. 6 months later, Emma received a video call from Sophia, who wanted to show off her newly decorated bedroom, a room she could now see in all its bright, cheerful colors. "Thank you," Miguel said, as Sophia demonstrated her ability to read print books for the first time. "Thank you for helping us stay together." Emma's work expanded as word spread about her unique approach to helping families in crisis. She developed training programs for social workers, teaching them to recognize the signs of exploitation disguised as charity. She consulted with hospitals and medical centers, helping them create ethical programs that provided care without breaking up families. But perhaps her most important work happened through the foundation she had started with the Harrisons' support. The Emma Sullivan Foundation for Family Preservation had grown from a small scholarship fund into a comprehensive organization that provided emergency financial assistance, medical care coordination, and legal advocacy for families facing impossible choices. One autumn afternoon, as Emma reviewed applications for the Foundation's newest program, she received an unexpected visitor at her office. Richard Blackwood stood in her doorway, looking older and less polished than she remembered from their encounters years ago. "Hello, Emma," he said, his voice lacking the smooth confidence she associated with him. "I was hoping we could talk." Emma gestured to a chair across from her desk, studying his face for clues about his intentions. "What can I do for you, Mr. Blackwood?" "I wanted to apologize," he said simply, "for the way I approached your situation and others like it. I convinced myself I was helping families, but I realize now that I was often making their situations worse." Emma leaned back in her chair, surprised by his apparent sincerity. "What changed your mind?" "I have a granddaughter now," Blackwood replied, "and watching my son struggle to provide for her medical needs made me understand what desperation really looks like. Made me realize that the families I worked with weren't making free choices. They were being coerced by circumstances I helped create." He reached into his briefcase and withdrew a thick folder. "I brought you something. Records of all the families. I placed through arrangements similar to yours. Some worked out well, like your situation. Others didn't." Emma accepted the folder with trembling hands, understanding immediately the significance of what he was offering. These records could help her track down families who might still be struggling, children who might need assistance, situations that could be improved with the right intervention. "There are 43 families represented there," Blackwood continued. "I don't expect forgiveness, but I hope the information can help you continue the work you're doing." After he left, Emma spent the evening reviewing the files. Some told stories of successful placements where children received needed care and remained connected to their birth families. Others revealed patterns of exploitation, isolation, and abuse that made her stomach turn. She immediately began reaching out to families from the files, offering support and resources through her foundation. Some had found their way to stability and happiness. Others needed immediate intervention to escape situations that had become dangerous or exploitative. One case particularly captured her attention. A young man named David Chen, who had been placed with a wealthy family at age 14 after his parents couldn't afford treatment for his severe asthma. Now 22 and aging out of the arrangement, David had no contact with his birth family and no support system beyond the family that had essentially purchased his custody. Emma tracked down David's birth parents, discovering they had spent years trying to locate their son through legal channels. The reunion she helped facilitate was emotional and transformative for everyone involved. David's adoptive family, when confronted with the reality of what they had participated in, agreed to provide financial support for him to reconnect with his birth culture and family while maintaining the medical care he needed. As Emma's foundation grew, so did her influence in shaping policy around child welfare and family preservation. She testified before legislative committees, consulted with government agencies, and spoke at conferences about the need for systemic change in how society supports vulnerable families. During one particularly memorable speaking engagement at a national social work conference, Emma shared the stage with Sofia Gonzalez, now 16 and thriving in school with her sight fully restored. Sophia spoke eloquently about the importance of keeping families together while still ensuring children receive the care they need. "Emma didn't just help me see with my eyes," Sophia told the audience. "She helped my father see that he didn't have to choose between loving me and taking care of me. She showed us that keeping our family together was possible." The speech received a standing ovation, but for Emma, the most meaningful moment came afterward when a young social worker approached her with tears in her eyes. "I have 3 cases right now that sound exactly like what you described," the woman said. "Families being pressured to give up custody in exchange for medical care. I didn't know there were alternatives until tonight." Emma spent an hour with the social worker, providing resources and contacts that could help those families find better solutions. It was work like this, one family at a time, one social worker at a time, that gave Emma the greatest sense of purpose. 10 years after her surgery, Emma married David Chen in a ceremony held at the Harrison Ranch. Their relationship had grown from professional collaboration to deep friendship to love as they worked together on cases involving displaced children and separated families. David's experience as someone who had navigated the foster care system provided a different but complementary perspective to Emma's work. Thomas walked Emma down the aisle, his steps steady and sure, his face glowing with pride. James and Margaret sat in the front row, beaming like the proud parents they had become through choice rather than biology. Carlos served as an usher, and Luna wore flowers in her mane as she grazed in the nearby pasture, too old for riding now, but still a beloved member of the ranch family. The wedding reception included families Emma had helped over the years, parents who had been reunited with children, children who had received medical care without losing their families, young adults who had aged out of the system with support and connections intact. Miguel Gonzalez proposed a toast that brought tears to everyone's eyes. To Emma, who taught us that love doesn't require sacrifice when we have the courage to build better systems. As Emma and David settled into married life, they continued their work through the foundation while starting a family of their own. Their son, born healthy and sighted, grew up surrounded by an extended family that included Thomas, the Harrisons, and dozens of people whose lives had been touched by Emma's work. But Emma never forgot the lessons of her own childhood. She made sure her son understood the value of every meal, every opportunity, every choice that came his way. She taught him about resilience, about the importance of using privilege to help others, and about the many different ways families can be formed and maintained. On quiet evenings at the ranch, where Emma and David had built a house within sight of the main homestead, she would sit on the porch and watch her son play in the yard, where she had once learned to trust a horse named Luna. The continuity of it all, the land, the love, the commitment to helping others, felt like the completion of a circle that had begun in a desperate trailer in Millbrook County so many years ago. The girl who had been sold for food had become a woman who ensured other children would never face that same impossible choice. In transforming her own tragedy into a force for systemic change, Emma had found not just healing for herself and her family, but a way to prevent other families from experiencing the desperate circumstances that had once torn hers apart. And, in the end, that transformation proved to be the most valuable gift of all, the knowledge that even the darkest chapters of our lives can become the foundation for helping others find their way to light. 25 years after that first thunderstorm revealed Emma's potential for sight, she found herself standing before the United States Senate Subcommittee on Children and Families. Her hair was now streaked with silver at the temples, and fine lines around her eyes spoke of years spent focusing intently on the faces of families in crisis. But her voice remained strong and clear as she addressed the senators gathered to hear testimony about proposed legislation that could revolutionize how the country approached child welfare. Honorable Senators, Emma began, I stand before you today not just as an expert in child welfare policy, but as someone who lived the consequences of a system that forces families into impossible choices. Behind her, a presentation screen displayed statistics that told a story of transformation. Since the passage of the Family Preservation and Medical Care Act legislation Emma had helped draft, the number of children surrendered for medical reasons had dropped by 70%. Emergency family support funding had prevented thousands of custody transfers, and a new network of medical partnerships ensured that no child went without treatment due to their family's financial status. Senator Patricia Williams, the subcommittee chair, leaned forward with interest. Dr. Sullivan Chen, can you walk us through a specific example of how these programs work in practice? Emma clicked to the next slide, which showed a photograph of a young girl with bright eyes and a confident smile. This is Maria Santos. 2 years ago, her family faced bankruptcy due to her complex cardiac condition. Under the old system, Maria might have been placed with a wealthy family in exchange for medical care. Instead, our rapid response network provided emergency funding within 48 hours. Her surgery was performed through our medical partnership program, and the family received ongoing support services. Maria is now thriving at home with her parents and siblings. The presentation continued for another hour, detailing case studies, cost analyses, and outcome measurements that demonstrated the effectiveness of keeping families together while ensuring children received necessary care. But for Emma, the most powerful moment came when Senator James Morrison, known for his skepticism about government social programs, asked a pointed question. Dr. Sullivan Chen, critics argue that these programs are expensive and that private charity has traditionally filled this role. How do you respond to that? Emma paused, thinking of Richard Blackwood and the complicated legacy of private arrangements that had shaped her own life. Senator Morrison, private charity often comes with strings attached that government programs don't. When a wealthy individual or organization pays for a child's care, they frequently expect something in return: influence over the child's life, custody rights, or public recognition. Government programs, while imperfect, provide care without requiring families to surrender their fundamental rights. After the hearing, Emma was approached by Dr. Amanda Foster, a pediatric surgeon from Johns Hopkins who had been working to establish similar programs on the East Coast. "Your testimony was remarkable," Dr. Foster said. "I've been following your work for years, and I'd love to discuss expanding some of these initiatives to our region." Their conversation led to a collaboration that would establish the National Center for Family-Centered Medical Care, a research and policy institute that Emma would eventually direct. The center became a hub for developing innovative approaches to healthcare delivery that prioritized family stability alongside medical outcomes. But even as Emma's professional influence grew, her most meaningful work often happened in quieter moments. There was the late-night phone call from a desperate mother in Oregon, whose autistic son needed specialized therapy the family couldn't afford. There was the emergency flight to Louisiana to testify in a custody case where a grandfather was fighting to maintain care of his disabled grandson. There was the young social worker in Montana who called seeking guidance on a case involving Native American children and the complex intersection of tribal sovereignty and child welfare law. Each case reinforced Emma's belief that systemic change required both policy advocacy and individual intervention. Her foundation had grown to include a crisis hotline staffed 24 hours a day by counselors trained to help families navigate complex medical and social service systems without resorting to custody transfers. One particularly challenging case arrived on a snowy December evening when Emma was reviewing year-end foundation reports at her home office. The caller was Dr. Patricia Reeves, Chief of Pediatric Oncology at Children's Hospital of Philadelphia. "Emma, I have a situation that's beyond anything our normal protocols can handle," Dr. Reeves explained. "Identical twin girls, age 8, both diagnosed with acute lymphoblastic leukemia. The family is undocumented, the father works construction under the table, and they've been approached by a couple from Switzerland who want to adopt both girls and take them overseas for treatment." Emma felt the familiar chill that accompanied cases involving international custody transfers. "What's the timeline?" "The family has been given 72 hours to decide. The Swiss couple has already arranged private jets and medical visas. They're painting it as the girl's only chance for survival." Emma was on a plane to Philadelphia within 6 hours. She spent the flight researching international medical tourism laws, contacting colleagues in Switzerland, and developing a strategy that could keep the family together while ensuring the girls received treatment. The Herrera family lived in a small apartment in South Philadelphia, where the smell of medicinal herbs mixed with the anxiety that permeated every surface. Maria and Sofia Herrera were identical in every way, except for the slight difference in how the chemotherapy had affected their hair growth. Their parents, Roberto and Luz, looked like they hadn't slept in weeks. "They say the treatment in Switzerland is better," Roberto explained through an interpreter, his voice heavy with the weight of impossible choices. They say our girls will have a better chance there. Emma spent the next 48 hours working frantically behind the scenes. She contacted immigration attorneys who specialized in humanitarian cases, medical social workers who understood the complexities of treating undocumented patients, and foundation partners who could provide emergency funding. Most importantly, she reached out to Dr. Hans Müller, a pediatric oncologist in Zurich, who she had met during a medical ethics conference. Dr. Müller, Emma said during their video call, I need you to evaluate the medical claims being made by this Swiss couple. Are they representing the treatment options accurately? Dr. Müller's response was illuminating. The treatment protocols at Children's Hospital of Philadelphia were actually more advanced than what was available in Switzerland, and the survival rates were comparable or better. The Swiss couple, he revealed, had a history of adopting children with medical needs, for reasons that appeared more psychological than altruistic. Armed with this information, Emma was able to present the Herrera family with alternatives they hadn't known existed. Emergency Medicaid could cover the girls' treatment regardless of their immigration status. A legal advocacy organization could help stabilize their residency situation. The foundation could provide housing assistance and support services throughout the treatment process. 6 months later, Emma received a video call from Maria and Sofia Herrera, both in remission and attending school in Philadelphia, while their parents worked toward legal residency. The family remained intact. The girls received excellent medical care, and they were thriving in an environment where they could maintain their cultural identity and family connections. Cases like the Herrera twins reinforced Emma's conviction that her work was about more than individual families. It was about challenging systems that perpetuated inequality and exploitation. She began writing a book about her experiences, tentatively titled Keeping Families Whole, A New Approach to Children's Medical Care. The book project connected Emma with families around the world who were facing similar challenges. She corresponded with a mother in Bangladesh whose daughter needed heart surgery, a father in rural Alabama whose son required specialized autism services, and a grandmother in Alaska who was raising her grandson with developmental disabilities. Each story reinforced the universal nature of parental love and the devastating impact of systems that forced families to choose between staying together and accessing necessary care. Emma's book became not just a memoir, but a call to action for healthcare providers, social workers, and policymakers worldwide. The book's publication coincided with Emma's 50th birthday, an event celebrated at the Harrison Ranch with a gathering that reflected the extended family her life had created. Thomas, now in his 70s but still vital and engaged, stood to offer a toast that brought tears to everyone's eyes. 50 years ago, I thought my biggest failure was having a daughter I couldn't take care of properly, he said, his voice strong despite his emotion. I know now that my biggest success was raising a daughter who learned to take care of everyone else's children too. The celebration included 3 generations of families Emma had helped over the years. Sofia Gonzalez, now a pediatric social worker herself, had brought her own children to meet the woman who had kept her family together during their darkest hour. David Chen's parents, who had finally immigrated from China and were living near the ranch, shared stories of their gratitude for the son who had been returned to them through Emma's intervention. James and Margaret Harrison, now in their 80s, remained active in the foundation's work and had established an endowment that would ensure its continuation for generations to come. Margaret still played piano every evening, and Emma often joined her in duets that filled the ranch house with music that spoke of healing and hope. Emma considered the question seriously. I think about it sometimes, but not with regret. Every path has its costs and benefits. The important thing is that we've used this path to help others find better options." Their conversation was interrupted by Emma's phone buzzing with an emergency text from the Foundation's crisis line. A family in Detroit was facing pressure to surrender custody of their disabled son in exchange for experimental treatment. Emma sighed, knowing that even after decades of progress, the work was far from finished. "Duty calls?" David asked with understanding. "Always," Emma replied, but she was smiling as she answered the call, because she knew that somewhere in Detroit, a family was about to discover that they had choices their parents' generation never had, options that Emma's own journey had helped create. As she walked back toward the house, preparing to spend the next several hours helping another family navigate an impossible situation, Emma reflected on the strange turns life could take. The girl who had been sold for the price of survival had become a woman who ensured no other child would face that same bargain. In the end, perhaps that was the greatest miracle of all. Not the surgery that had given her sight, not the family that had chosen to love her, but the transformation of trauma into purpose, of personal healing into universal change. The circle was complete, but it was also ever expanding, reaching new families, new children, new possibilities for keeping love intact even in the face of impossible odds. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out, and don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.